This week on the week ahead, will MCO be introduced next week? Also, do we expect more water cuts in Klang, Shah Alam and Petaling Jaya? As well as the conversation or the perennial conversation of the coalition that is currently governing the country. My name is Ibrahim Sani. You are watching The Week Ahead. Let's start with the last point, talking about the political situation in the country. There's a lot of events that unfolded last week, including that of the former aide of Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim, Saiful Bukhari, entering or joining Bersatu as a party member. We've also seen news coming out from the Registrar of Societies denying the creation of new political parties, Pejuang as well as Muda. And of course, the ongoing continuous conversation of UMNO, whether or not they want to be in or out of the ruling PN coalition of the government. And of course, all this has stemmed down to a lot of kicking the can down the road conversations. Like for instance, UMNO, we've seen how during the Supreme Council meeting, they've decided to postpone it even further by taking the motion of whether UMNO should stay in the government to be discussed in the upcoming General Assembly or PAU of UMNO at the end of the month. And because of this, the uncertainty that continues to unfold in the relationship between the coalition partners of the ruling government continues to falter even further. Earlier in the week, I was hosting a particular conference where there were a lot of political scientists as well as political commentators coming in to join that conversation. One of them is, of course, Professor James Chin of University of Tasmania, and he talks about the permanent instability that exists in Perikatan Nasional. And despite the fact that the ruling coalition right now is actually forming a government to form one cohesive unit, it's actually two types of coalition that exist within it. One is, of course, Perikatan Nasional, which comprises just about three parties, PN, PAS, and another partner. Of course, BN, the constituencies that we all know is, of course, UMNO, MCA, MIC, and PBRS. So because of the two-in-one coalition that exists within the government, there seems to be a continuous argument of whether or not this kind of solution is going to be found in terms of governing the situation right now. So then begs the question of GE15, whether or not GE15 will ever be announced this year. And some political commentators, including that of Dr. Bridget Welsh, as well as Ben Sophian of Berita Center, saying things like there is a slim chance of GE15 being called because of the fact that the Prime Minister is expected to continue to govern with the mandate that was attained through the 2018 general election. So he has until 3 years to govern. So for this week, we've seen the continuous instability that is currently happening in the political scene. And for next week, we are going to see the partners of the ruling coalition continue to talk amongst each other on whether or not this can actually be resolved in the near term. A lot of expectations are coming across a point where there might not be a resolution to be attained, and therefore the political crisis continues for next week. That is the kind of expectations that needs to be gotten. But of course, from the investment front and from the investing world, that doesn't seem to move the needle too much, largely because investors are looking at the legal framework of the country as well as the job situation in the country. Those are the two key indicators that potential investors, both foreign as well as domestic, is thinking about. And because of that, we've seen some indicators coming in from Bursa Malaysia, where trading is actually quite healthy for the first week. I mentioned this earlier through our sister show, Fokus Minggu Depan in Bahasa Malaysia, where traders are normally cautious during the first week of the year. And that has seemed to be the case for this week. We've seen how traders are still taking it slow for the first week to come. And for the next week, we are going to see a more robust investment scene coming in. And this is quite literally because all these investors are coming back from wherever they are and trying to see where they stand for this year. On a side note, for the retail investors out there and for the Bumiputra investors out there who have taken out their ASB, the rates are back in terms of the actual interest rate that they've seen. We've seen how PNB announced a 3.5% rate for last year, and if you measure actual balance for this year versus last year, a more actualized interest rate would be around 3.3%. And a slight note to those that are currently taking ASB loans, my heart goes to you because you are currently paying about 2% or 2.5%. Despite interest rates still being low right now, we're still going to see some profit margin because the interest rate is about 3.3% and loan is about 2.5%, so there's still about 0.7% or 1.0% profit there. So those are the kind of situation that is currently happening with the retail investors. For institutional investors, because of the fact that COVID-19 is still raging across the country and of course across the international world as well, institutional investors are going to be able to take stock of what has happened for the first week. So for next week, institutional investors might want to think about trying to spread their gains and try to plot their holdings for the year. So we're going to see a lot of sellout of their holdings that is currently taking place. One such interesting transaction, of course, was announced at the tail end of last year, where AirAsia Investment Limited sold about 33% of their shares in their holdings in AirAsia India to Tata Motors for over $20 million US, bringing the valuation of AAI to over $100 million US. Bollingham, the CEO of aviation for AirAsia, says that the disposal was more of AirAsia Group trying to manage their cash, which is prudent. A lot of analysts are also looking at the point of interest where the cash situation amongst airlines are going to be dire for the months to come. So AirAsia doing this and getting more cash in hand for themselves is actually a good way to move forward. Side note there, I'm going to be having a conversation with James Hay of Pangolin Investment, and because of the fact that they have just launched an aviation fund. So if you want to learn more about how the aviation sector is going to shape up and why investors are now coming into that sector, which is interesting, why aviation, right? Watch my interview with James Hay that's going to take place early next week. So that's going to happen for the week ahead. For now, when it comes to investments, as well as the ruling coalition of the government. So when you take politics and the business world aside, they seem to be having a very low correlation between one another. So while the political instability continues to persist, the business world continues to rock on. We'll take a short break before we continue to talk about the possible water disruptions that's going to take place in Klang Valley, quite possibly early next week. We'll be right back after these messages. You're watching The Week Ahead. I'm your host, Ibrahim Sani. Very recently, Air Selangor has announced a possible water disruption across several parts of Shah Alam, Klang, Petaling, as well as nearby areas because of the scheduled water cuts for 2 days. Some areas that were mentioned across the board in Air Selangor's announcement include Section 22, 26, 27, 28, 29 of Shah Alam, Kampung Jawa, Taman Maznah, Banda Putra at Klang, as well as a bunch of areas in USJ in Petaling. This is of course scheduled, and therefore please make necessary measures in ensuring that you have the necessary water supply within your areas. But the more important thing that needs to be discussed is about the unscheduled water disruptions across the Air Selangor jurisdiction. And this is of course another issue that needs to be addressed quite systematically because structurally we are talking about the government as well as institutional bodies that are managing public resources like water that is going to have a very tough time for this year, not just the week ahead, but for the year ahead. People are also questioning the role of bodies like JKR, for instance, in managing potholes that we've seen that has ravaged the country because of the continuous rain that we are experiencing right now because of the monsoon season. And we've seen how Good Samaritans have stepped up to the fore, trying to close the potholes by themselves through their communities. So on one hand, we have to applaud the community for stepping up and trying to fix their neighborhood in their own manner with their own capacity. But on the other hand, we have to ask whether or not there is an abdication of responsibility from those that are in power. And that will be the central theme for Malaysians for this year, largely because there has to be a check and balance in place when it comes to those that are exuding responsibility and holding responsibility versus those that are receiving the kind of benefits from that kind of responsibility, i.e. the people. And because of the perceived abdication of power that is currently existing, at least when it comes to national supply of water as well as the good use of roads, we're going to see a lot of demand and a lot of call from the people in ensuring that they get better services across their municipalities and their towns. So those are the kind of theme that will take place at least for the near term. And for the week ahead, we do expect water disruptions that are going to take place very, very soon across these kind of areas. Another area that needs to be discussed is, of course, the issue of a possibility of MCO being announced next week. We've seen how over the past few days there has been a string of high daily cases, topping even 3,000 new daily cases very, very recently, and the R number is now oscillating between 1.1 to 1.2. The DG of Health, Tan Sri Nur Hisham, has also argued using very interesting words like, for instance, pressure, breaking point, and breaking down. See, reporters that have been covering his press conferences have taken note into the kind of words that he uses, and he does choose his words very carefully. So when you hear the DG of Health using words like breaking point, pressure, and breaking down consistently in his press conferences last week, we really have to sit up and ask ourselves, would the country benefit with stringent MCOs being introduced? And this is where we have to now talk about the mom and pop living on WhatsApp group, because over the past few days there have been a lot of hoax announcement in terms of MCOs being announced, and we have to listen to the official announcement, look up for the official announcement quite literally, because we want to avoid fear-mongering and, of course, rumor mill being exacerbated beyond control. We have to also take note that the continued persistence of fake news will just endanger public lives at large. Because of that, please do not spread any news that cannot be verified, like, for instance, the Prime Minister announcing MCO before the Prime Minister does it himself. So those are the kind of things that we have to be watching out for in terms of next week, i.e. The possibility of an MCO being announced. Now, there have been talks whether or not the MCO that will be announced next week will be in the form of how we've seen in the proper MCO that we saw in March 2020, or will it be a hybrid of MCOs, i.e. a targeted MCO and enhanced MCO that we've seen being introduced across several municipalities in and around the country towards later of last year. This is because the targeted MCO seems to be bearing better results in terms of containing the spread of the virus versus a nationwide blanket MCO. Because of that, if an MCO is announced by the Prime Minister or by the government next week, the expectations is that it will be more of a targeted MCO or an enhanced MCO rather than a nationwide MCO. Having said that, there is a graph that I want to share, actually two graphs that I want to share that was shared by the DG of Health. Here's the two graphs. As you can see, this is the projected figure by the DG in trying to show the projected case of a possibility of daily number of cases growing should the R number stay at 1.1. On the other graph, if I can pull up the second graph, this shows the expected number of cases growing should the R number stay at 1.2. As you can see, it hits 8,000 new daily cases if it's 1.2 as early as March. And of course, if it's 1.1, it's as early as May. And these are the kind of realization that we have to take stock of. We have to curb the virus quite aggressively, because the failure of doing so is that the health system will be broken. It's as simple as that. It's when we talk about patients being intubated in the ICU, it's not just about the number of beds that is currently being occupied in the ICU. We're talking about the entire apparatus of the ICU being overburdened. Doctors, nurses, the cleaning companies that is going to have to sanitize the ICUs periodically if and when it's being used, the number of ventilators that is currently put in place. The entire framework of the ICU will be broken if the numbers are continuing to rise. And the responsibility for us to continue to keep these numbers down, at least for next week, is of course literally down to us. So if you can work from home, please do so, failure of which we're going to see these numbers continue to rise. And also take note that not many of us can stay at home to do our work. There's a lot of jobs out there that require them to be outside of the house. So if you can, please stay at home. If you can't, try to work an arrangement where you are just outside for just a short time without any interaction with any other human beings. So those are the kind of things that you've got to think about for the week ahead. I will take one more short break before we touch on the topic that is very close to my heart, which is CES that is currently happening in Las Vegas as well as virtually. We'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back. You are watching The Week Ahead. I'm your host, Ibrahim Sani. So in the week ahead, the Consumer Electronics Show that I normally go to physically in Las Vegas is going to be taking place virtually, as per all the other expositions that have taken place over the past few months. Of course, CES being virtual doesn't also exclude the fact that they're going to be introducing some interesting products, and some of the things that we are going to see in CES for this year include VR, AR, as well as AI technology that we've seen CES introduced over the past few years. The only thing that is different right now is that the products and the services that is going to be introduced in this year's CES is actually no longer prototype. A lot of companies, anywhere from Google to Lenovo to IBM, is going to be rolling up products that is going to be gotten in the market. Very recently, I had a conversation with Lenovo General Manager Malaysia, talking about the kind of products that Lenovo is rolling out in Malaysia. Those are the kind of things that you should watch out for, because the theme for the application of AR, VR and AI will be on productivity, will be on e-learning, and also will be on cost optimization across the board for good services and good products that will be gotten by the consumers for this year. We all know that COVID-19 is going to be a continuing and central theme for this year, and therefore technology will continue to be prominent for the entire year. So for the week ahead, try to watch some of the products launches at CES, and because of the urgency of these kind of products, you might see these kind of products hitting the market very soon, much sooner than normally seen before from the previous CES shows. Some of the prototype products were already being introduced in the CES of before, and therefore it's more of a refinement of products that is going to be introduced for this year's CES. Now, before we go on any further, think about the kind of things that you need and the kind of things that you want in ensuring that you continue to be productive for this year. Assuming that you have to work from home most of the days, some of the products that you might want include good machines that require little energy but is a beast to work with. That kind of necessity and that kind of demand that you have is currently being addressed by all the tech companies, all the consumer tech companies right now across the country and across the world. Wearables is going to be a key feature, including health tracking devices. So those are going to be some of the prominent products that is going to be introduced in CES as well. And Malaysia, being a front market for consumer tech, will be among the first to be receiving these kind of products. So do expect some rollout there as well. If you have any ideas on how the consumer world will be shaping up, share us your thoughts, drop us some of your comments, use the hashtag AWANI News, tag me personally at Ibrahim Saninet on Twitter, and perhaps we can have a continued conversation in the following episode. But for now, that's it for the week ahead. Have a good week ahead, and I wish you all the best and stay safe, everyone. Goodbye.